Okay, we're getting close. All right, folks, the clock on the clubhouse wall has just turned to 7:30, and I'd like to declare the meeting open. For those that are new to OC chapter of the California Rare Fruit Growers, you know, we're a group of like-minded people, and we enjoy growing food and fruit, and we enjoy sharing our knowledge with those that would like to participate. I hope everybody is okay and is getting back to what I think is a new normal, and you know, doing the best they can under the circumstances. We have been pushed into a corner, and that's why we are doing the Zoom meetings, to try and keep the camaraderie going that we have, and try to keep everybody interested. And as a part of that, you know, we've been putting the presentations from a lot of our speakers, or all of our speakers, on YouTube, so that everybody has access to it. But when the coronavirus has run its course and becomes history, then we will go back to our standard meetings at the Congregational Church in Santa Ana. That means that we may or may not be able to, or wish to, present speakers in the forum that we have at the moment. So those that are interested and get value out of what we are presenting, I suggest you go to our webpage, www.ocfruit.com, and join us. Click on the drop-down menu and have a look there, and you'll see a membership sheet, and you'll see the cost for joining and the address to send your membership form to. And we'd like to, and we encourage new visitors to our forum, and we like to grow, and we like the community to grow. So I'll lead in with that, and then call on members from the club, from the chapter, to present anything that is outstanding. Martha, do you have anything to add as secretary?
Nothing right now.
Okay. And from treasurer, I think, John, everything is good in your area? I don't hear anything, so I guess everything is okay. Has anybody else got anything particular that they want to bring up at this point in time? You know, I'd like to get into Robert's presentation. It sounds like it's a very, very interesting approach to, or an alternative approach to gardening, especially with fruit trees. And we're all kind of get hit come springtime, pruning everything back, and then we get told that we've got to prune stuff through summer to keep everything in shape, but maybe that's a myth. And Robert is going to clear everything up for us. But anyway, Ty, I'll let you make the introductions. If somebody's got their hand up anywhere to say something, then we can address that. I know that our sales, plant sales, has been going gangbusters, and I think our inventory is run down to a very, very low level. And I thank everybody that's made contributions to that, either through volunteer work or purchase of product, but it's been very successful. And thanks to everybody that did their bit to make this work, especially under the circumstances at the moment. So thank you again for that. So Ty, I'll hand over to you, and yeah, you can carry on from here.
Thanks, John. All right, so tonight we've got lined up Robert Kourik, and just a heads up that for next month in July, we've got John Valenzuela, also from the Bay Area, or up in the Bay Area. He's joining us tonight on the meeting. Thanks for showing up, John. he'll be discussing somewhere in the topic of food forestry and kind of sharing some of his experience living and working in food forests around the world. So tonight we've got Robert Kourik. He wrote, he's written many books. He's got 18 books and counting. Prolific author, very much focused on horticulture and gardens. And his most recent book is called Lazy Ass Gardening. And I will attempt to share. It's not coming up on my visual with my background. But his newest book, Lazy Ass Gardening, Maximize Your Soil, Minimize Your Toil. And just a brief description of that, which is part of the presentation he's going into. Robert unfolds his manifesto of inspired laziness, using efficiency and forethought to create gardens and landscapes with a lot less work and a lot more enjoyment. And tonight he'll be sharing with us focus on shaping fruit trees in the summer. With that, I'll let you take it away, Robert.
Hi, thanks for having me, Ty. Well, the topic tonight is shaping, not pruning. And the overview of this is in that book, the Lazy Ass Gardener book. So it's also in my original book, Designing and Maintaining Your Edible Landscape Naturally. Now, can you see the screen I'm seeing? It says shaping, not pruning.
You have to share the screen. Click
where is it?
On the bottom. It should have a button for you.
Oh, I gotta go back to Zoom, I guess.
Yeah, in Zoom, there'll be a button that'll say share screen.
Okay, just a second. Share screen. Yes, I see it. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yep, we can.
Okay, good.
You'll have to go into the full screen view.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, now you've got it full screen.
Yep, we're still seeing the presenter view here.
Oh.
Like we had when we trialed it.
Yeah, I know. Maybe we'll have to do that. Sorry.
No problem.
Sorry. Oh, I see what's happening though. It says I'm sharing the screen, but the prompt.
Go ahead and start the PowerPoint presentation, and then we'll actually come up full screen, I think.
I did it start from beginning.
It's still showing the presenter view.
How's that?
That's it.
Perfect.
Okay, good. Sorry about all this. This is the first time I've done this.
You're doing great.
We're going to talk about shaping trees, not pruning. It doesn't mean you get rid of the clippers actually altogether, but I'm going to teach you a few techniques that I use to increase productivity and spend less time doing it. Now, you mentioned pruning all year round. This is a tree that was pruned and butchered in the winter, not in my backyard, but it can only be revived. If you want to try to revive it at all, you can only do summer pruning, no winter pruning whatsoever, because winter pruning stimulates growth and summer produces less growth. Summer pruning kind of slows things down. So removal of what people call shoots or water sprouts should be done in the summer only, about this time of year, a little bit later. So a little bit about fruit. If you don't prune an apple tree at all, you get more fruit than pruning moderately or hard pruning. You see in this drawing that the first 5 years of this apple, no pruning produced about 200 pounds of fruit, hard pruning less than 100 pounds of fruit. 5 years later, the next 5 years, no pruning is still higher than moderate or hard pruning. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, one of the problems is you get this. You get a nightmare of little tiny apples and a tree that could break apart from the weight of the fruit. So that's part of the reason we prune and thin fruit. But I like to remind people, if you're making cider, you're not worried at all about the size of the fruit. The more fruit, the merrier. So you might consider that as a possibility. But the main problem with a photo like this is that the weight of the fruit is out at the edges and it may collapse. So let's talk a little bit about pruning, get everybody on the same page. First, we start with apical dominance. That's the bud at the very top of the tree, the first bud, and it's the bud that wants to grow straight up and produce a lot of length and not too much side growth. Apical dominance is a hormone that comes back down from that upper bud into the tree and slows down the growth of other limbs so that it can have an advantage of growth over other buds. But once you have a bud that's at the top of a tree or at the end of a branch, it's called apical dominance, and it helps control its own growth, favor its own growth. So you can see here that you've got apical buds on several side shoots. And then we have dormant buds that are neither fruiting buds or shoot buds. And then we have fruit spurs. So tonight's topic of shaping, not pruning, is best geared towards spur type trees like apples, pears, Asian pears. With peaches, you are relying more on pruning, but it doesn't have to be necessarily done in the winter, but you can prune peaches in the winter. And again, by pruning in the winter, you can get more side shoots. So when you cut off the apical bud in the wintertime, dormant buds below that will sprout and shoot out sideways, and you can increase the number of shoots and get more fruit in the subsequent year. So here we have a section A. The section A is the most fruitful part of an arched limb. You can see there's that tall vertical shoot. That is where the apical bud formed on that arch. So when you bend the branch down, usually about the highest bud on the branch will sprout right away and have apical dominance. By bending the branch down, you'll see that the growth is greatly slowed down. And in that outer edge, outer quarter or third of the limb in zone A is where you have a lot more fruit regardless of how you prune the tree. You can see there's that two little shoots to the left of the A that look like the antenna. That's the same amount of growth in one season as that tall vertical shoot off the arch. I wish I could point at these things, but I can't point.
We can't actually see your cursor, so if you just hovered the cursor around, I think that was showing up.
Oh, okay. There, okay, great. So there's the one season's growth here and one season's growth here. So you can see how apical dominance furthers the growth of a shoot. And once you bend it down past level, you get almost no growth at all. So we have eucalyptus tree that was bent over and the apical bud took off from a dormant bud and produced vertical growth. This is at the Burbank Center in Santa Rosa at his house. They're doing an arched plum tree with several varieties of plums on it. And you can see how it tends to favor vertical growth instead of side shoots. You need to have more like a 45-degree angle on the limb to get a balance between vertical growth from apical dominance and some side growth and fruit spur. Now this is another example of a tree that somebody really butchered. This is taken in the winter. It's not dead, but it should be because it's a worthless tree. But if you were going to try to restore a tree like this, you can only do it in the summer, and you would have to do massive cuts, and it might take you 5-10 years to get back to something that was what it should have been before it was butchered. Here's another case where the fairgrounds in Santa Rosa, they topped all the trees, and then they lost about 10% because they topped them so much. You're never supposed to top a tree and take out the middle part of the trunk. You can end up with this situation. Now, this is what we do a survey. How many people think this is a butchered tree? Is it butchered or is it art? I can't see anybody, so. Here's another one. How about this one? Is that a butchered tree or is that art? And then the third one, this one's my favorite in my neighborhood. Somebody went crazy with shaping this tree. It's a sycamore. Well, let's get back to fruit. So now we're going to talk about shaping fruit trees. So we need to know that we're dealing mostly with spur type trees, the apples, pears, Asian pears, and to a little bit extent plums and apricots and that sort of thing, but mostly apples, pears, and Asian pears. They have what's called a spur growth. So you've got a short stubby branch here. It looks like a branch, but each one of these buds is a flower bud. And the branch doesn't grow any further once all these flower buds form. And it will bloom here 1 year, fruit here, another year be dormant as far as flower goes, and then fruit here. So it trades off, blooms in one bud, rests another bud, and then fruits in another bud. But on an apple tree, once you've formed a spur cluster like this, it'll last for up to 25 years fruiting in the same place. So that's why you want to spend a little bit of time the first year or two of the life of the tree to form those spurs and get fruit without much effort after that point. Now this particular slide is from a spur, what's called a spur type apple. Notice how close the buds are. Spur type is a selection that was found in nature as a natural cultivar, so to speak, where somebody spotted a tree and had a lot of spur growth on it. They grafted it onto another tree and maintained the variety's tendency to produce a lot of flower. There's no branches except for this. These are all fruiting areas. So the spur type apples are the most productive apples, regardless of whatever rootstock you put them on. If you put them on a dwarfing rootstock, they're going to still outbear regular types of apples. So you have what's called Arkansas Black, but you can also buy Arkansas Black Spur, and it has these buds closer together. There's an Asian pear, the young bud here. You can usually tell the flower spur because it has more than one stem for a leaf. So these are two buds, and in this case, there's 4 leaf stems originating just below the bud. Any questions so far? No? Okay.
Looks like we don't see any in the chat box yet.
Okay. Here's the first year of a spur on an apple. Last year's growth started right here where the wrinkles are. So you can tell the difference between 1-year-old wood and 2-year-old wood by a change in color and the wrinkles that form just after it sprouts. So this is a 2-year-old bud that is becoming a fruiting spur. So this is what we get when we have a blossom. We have a fruit spur here, and then we have 4, 5, 6 stems to flowers, and then 5 or 6 leaf stems around the spur. This is pink pearl apple. Now there's another category of fruiting called terminal bearing, and like persimmons, they don't need any pruning whatsoever. They fruit at the end of new growth. So they pop growth in the spring, then flower, and then they fruit. So if you prune them really hard, you get new growth and you get some fruit. If you never prune them, you get what's in this slide, way too much fruit. this tree was never pruned and is in danger of falling apart from the weight of the fruit. So it shows you how close to the tips the fruit forms. So that's called terminal bearing. Citrus fits in that category. Then we have a rare thing called coterminal, figs. If you leave a fig tree unpruned, you'll get a crop in the midsummer that's fruiting on last year's wood. This spring, new growth started, and it's making fruit now on the new wood that will ripen up come September, October. Maybe earlier where you are, but up here, we're lucky if we get it in before the end of October. So you can prune a fig tree back as much as you want, and you'll still get the late crop in the fall. But you'll skip the summer crop if you prune it too much in the winter. Now, the angle of attachment. We're looking towards somewhere between 40 to 60 degree angle for the ideal angle of attachment to get a balance between the tip of the apical dominance of the tip of this limb, not overriding all the dormant buds. So if you put a branch down to 80 or 90 degrees, all the dormant buds start to sprout. And the first one up becomes the tallest one. And you get what people call water sprouts. They're not water sprouts, but you get a lot of unwanted growth. If you maintain a 45 degree angle, you get a lot of side shoots, but not too many, and they tend to stay well controlled and not go rampant like they do when the branch is horizontal. So apical dominance gives some growth extension, but the flowers can form on some of these smaller shoots and accumulate the carbohydrates they need to fatten up the dormant bud to become a flowering fruiting bud. Now, here's what a lot of people think of an espalier tree. This is a tree that looks perfect and it is well pruned, but it's very productive because it's not an apple, it's not a pear, it's not an Asian pear, it's a quince. And quinces are in that category of terminal bearing. They have to grow some in the spring before you see the bloom, and then they make the fruit. So that this form can maintain because they prune back very hard every winter to get the form they wanted, and they still got some fruit coming along in the summer, in the fall, due to the terminal bearing capability of the tree. That doesn't happen with an apple tree. Here's a similar espalier at the, this is in the river by the UN building in New York City. They have an enormous collection of espalier fruit trees there. And this is the cordon that's horizontal. And what's going wrong here? You've got a vertical trunk going up, which means the bud at the top wants to send a deadening hormone down to not make side shoots. And then the pruner has shaped the limbs horizontal, which means that most of the dormant buds want to shoot out and be vertical shoots. So that means you've got to prune hard in the winter to get any growth to sprout out below that terminal bud on the vertical axis. And you have to prune hard all summer to control vertical growth that's coming off of the horizontal axis. So that's why I never recommend this type of espalier tree, because you're working against the hormones of the tree in every regard, and it's just an awful lot of work. And sometimes it's not so well done. So here's an apple tree that was abandoned partly, and they came back and they tried to re-prune after 1 or 2 years of no pruning. And so you can see that the thing is totally out of character. As a footnote, this is burned, south-facing concrete wall. The tree was not painted white on the trunk and lower limb when it was planted, and it got scalded, and it's got permanent damage. And you can see another tree has the same situation here. The little white spots are mushrooms growing out of the dead wood. And here they tried to do the horizontal cordon with branches going sideways on the wires, but they didn't prune back the apical bud dominance of this dormant bud when it sprouted. And they didn't cut back foliage here to get more light. So there's a lot of problems with this tree, and it looks ugly. Should. There's the close-up of the damage. I put this in here because a lot of people, when they're doing espalier, they tend to put them near walls, and even away from walls, trees. When I plant a fruit tree, I paint about 50% latex paint and water from the soil up to the first couple branches, so that you don't get sun scald that first winter or second winter, summer. So here we are at the UN building again, another type of espalier. These were trained by a pro from Long Island who had a catalog company selling espalier fruit trees through the mail. He also was a master at the craft, and so he has almost every configuration of espalier you could imagine at the UN Plaza. But again, we've got the same situation here where we've got a vertical shoot, and these side shoots can only happen by cutting back the vertical shoot every winter severely, try to stimulate dormant buds to sprout sideways. And then the leaves on those short sprouts can feed carbohydrates into the dormant buds to make flower buds. So here's what you have to do with a typical espalier tree like the few I just showed you. The classic French Lorette method of pruning says that you have to prune the shoot back at least 3 times in the summer, because you're trying to get the carbohydrates from the leaves stored into these last few buds. So when it grows in the spring and early summer, you clip it back a little bit to try to slow it down, get rid of some of the apical dominance. That will help further a little bit more carbohydrates before that. Then you clip it again midsummer or so, and you're reducing the length of the shoot while allowing it to store up more carbohydrates. And then the final pruning before spring. And you'll get then flower buds. Every single leaf stem will have a flower bud forming. But this is a lot of work, so I'm going to show you how to avoid it. Here's a better looking espalier tree, but they didn't maintain the vertical growth on the top horizontal, and it overgrows the rest of the tree. So this limb used to be the same diameter as these two, but because apical dominance furthers the growth above itself, it tends to wither the growth below it. So in order to keep this from happening, you would have to prune these vertical shoots more often. So we go back to horizontal growth favors shooting branches, vertical growth. A diagonal of 40, 45 degrees, 60 is a good balance between some growth for extension and side shoots and some fruiting. So why not just start at day 1? The minute you get a shoot that's 6, 8, 12 inches long, put a toothpick in there so that you stick the toothpick in the shoot, the vertical shoot, spread the new shoot out, stick the toothpick in, and now it's at a nice 45-degree angle. Come the end of the summer, you can pop that toothpick out of there and it'll maintain most of that angle. Might bounce back a little bit, but you'll have a nice wide angle of attachment for strength and 45-degree angle for a balance between fruit and vegetative growth. You can also do it in the spring with clothespins, where you clip them onto the tree right above the bud, so you're forcing it to go out sideways. What happens is when you release these come midsummer, it'll bounce up the limb, and it'll be the equivalent of having a 45-degree angle of attachment. So that's where another thing I use is clothespins. Now, how do you figure out the 45-degree angle? Well, you don't go out into the orchard with a, what do you call these things, a protractor. You don't go out there with a protractor, you go out there with your finger. The rule of finger is, if you can stick your finger between the branch and the shoot and not see light, it's the right angle. If you slip your finger in there and you see light below your finger, it's too narrow. Then you need to spread the shoot to get a nice 45-degree angle. On older trees, if you come into a situation where somebody's already taken care of the tree, but they let it get too vertical, you can make spreader stickers where you take a 1x1 or 1x2 and put a nail in each end and spread the limbs and poke the nail into the limb. And then after a few years, you can take that away and you'll get pretty much the same shape, but it takes years to do it after it's been ignored. Whereas you can do it year one with a toothpick. There's the nails and there's the shoot. Now, some people try to spread their limbs using the pruning. Somebody's taken the pruning here and popped it there and then tied it over here. And then they took another pruning here and put it based up against this limb. Problem with that is if there's any wind whatsoever, they usually pop out. So I don't recommend that. It's just somebody that didn't want to use that green tape, I guess. This is a way you can lower a limb, but I don't recommend it, but it's one option. Here's another option for lowering those limbs. My favorite option. Now this gets closer to reality. The problem with this string attached to the rock is it gets in the way of weeding or mowing the grasses. But you could start the string in the spring and pull it down by moving the rock out further and further. But again, it's too much effort to tie that string there, move the rock, keep track of that. So what I recommend is oblique cordon. Oblique cordon is a tree where the tree itself is planted at the 45-degree angle. Ignore this part here. Oblique cordon, 45-degree angle. If it's good for the branch, why not do it for the whole tree? So here's a planting I did in the Occidental experiment with half the trees were pruned in the Lorette system with summer pruning, and half the trees were done in this method I developed using oblique cordon, where the whole tree is at the ideal angle. So all you have to do is control the vertical growth of apical dominance. These are temporarily tied to sticks until they get a little bit stiffer, and you can tie them directly to the 3 wires that are going across the planting area. Now you can do oblique cordon without a trellis. It's just a little bit harder, but you got to start with a stake at a 45-degree angle and maybe keep it there 3, 4, 5 years until it gets good and stiff and you can take the stake away. You speed up the process by having a wire trellis. So then you can get a lot of fruit hanging off all the branches. And I'll tell you how you do it. You do it by, when the shoot in the spring gets 6, 8, 12 inches long, it's still limber. Instead of growing up like this, you connect a few clothespins and cause it to bend down. And that immediately gets rid of the apical dominance because it goes horizontal. It furthers the fruiting area without any regards to pruning on this curved outside curve. The only thing you have to watch for is if there's a shoot starts to pop out early summer, let's say, late spring, and it starts to pop out there at the top of that curve, you want to nip it off rub it off with your thumb or nip it off with a clipper, but you don't want it to grow and become a dominant shoot. But simply by weighting the limb down with clothespins, you get a zone of fruiting that takes care of itself. And as the weight of the fruit forms year after year, you get more of a curve and more fruiting. But you don't get that much of a wider tree. So I used the wire in some cases just to clip the tip right to the wire. And sometimes I clipped it just to the young shoot and had it hanging out there. And you can see there that everything in this photo except for this limb right here is a flower bud. And I prune all my fruit trees back really hard. I leave less than a foot usually after I plant the tree because I want as many buds as possible right after the graft union to sprout. And that will give me fruit down very low. And then as the tree grows, we can get fruit higher and higher and higher. But if you plant a fruit trees and do what a lot of people say, prune it off at 2 feet or 3 feet, you'll have a lot of blank space down near the graft. Might be 10 inches, might be 12 inches, might be 18 inches and no limbs. And so you're picking fruit the first year at your head's height, but you wasted all that space below that point. So what I do is I cut the tree back about 6-8 buds above the graft and make sure the first bud that grows back up to be the terminal bud, but allow the others to branch out. So when I do that, I literally have to pick the apple off the mulch because the weight of the fruit on the young shoot causes the limb to go down, and it's so close to the ground that it fruits on the ground, sometime first or second year. As the tree gets older, you can eliminate those limbs if you want with summer pruning, but why not leave them bare for as long as possible? So
hey, Robert, we had a clarifying question.
Sure.
So the question was, what root stocks are you recommending for the oblique cordon system you showed?
Oh, okay. It depends upon the tree. If it's apple, the more dwarfing that it is, the slower it'll grow. So like on an apple, I forget, I get them all confused, M26 or M27. You don't want to use M9 because it grows so slow that it's almost hard to get it to make enough branches to fruit. You can do it on non-dwarfing rootstock, but you do have to do a lot of summer pruning to keep that top down. These Asian pears in this photo are Old Home Farmingdale cross. Old Home, OH cross F, Old Home Farmingdale rootstock. And the problem with Asian pears is it's not a very good dwarfing rootstock, maybe 10 to 20% smaller than a regular standard rootstock. But I was able to keep these trees below 8 feet for the 6 years I ran the project. And the minute I left the project and they abandoned the trees, they got 20 feet tall. Now here's a wide angle of attachment with a peach tree. And you can see that the peaches, which are inclined to flower on new growth only 1 year and fruit on the following spring, are summer red. Let me say that again. The growth comes off the tree in the spring, flowers, makes fruit. Next year, it flowers on a different set of wood that's only 2 years old. Here we can see that the limbs are well attached so that even though this is not a dwarf rootstock and we're not doing a espalier, we are getting a healthy angle of attachment for strength. These trees are some I designed for a client in 1982, and notice that they're all planted on mounds. In fact, you can see roots, and it's not a problem because those roots that are showing there are holding the tree up, and they are not feeding off the soil. There's bark on those roots. They're exposed to the sunlight, gradually, and they got bark, and they're just for the strength of the tree, not for the feeding. Roots grow 1 to 3 times wider than the foliage, beyond the foliage, and so for this tree here, the feeding roots are out in the alleyway between the trees, not near the trunk. I had a study done with radioactive isotopes. I found this study, and the first meter out from the trunk was less than 10% of all the water and nutrients absorbed by the root system. There's a way of doing with a proper dwarfing rootstock. It's called central leader, where you do maintain a leader up through the middle, but you got to keep an eye on that apical dominant bud so it doesn't further its own growth too much. But all the branches on this tree are pretty much at a 45-degree angle, and it's loaded with fruit spurs. This is Asian pear. Now, we can get even more fun. Every single bud on the tree, you can determine whether it's going to be a branch or a fruiting bud solely by using a round file, a rat's tail file, they call it. If you stroke the file above a bud and make a scar that goes halfway around the limb of a shoot, you're not scarring so deep that it weakens the shoot. You're just taking off down to the cambium, the green little layer. You get a branch. Now, this is a time where I quiz everybody. I don't know if we can quiz people on Zoom, but why, when I scar above a bud, does it become a branch?
You can have people type something in the chat window.
Yeah.
So, will you repeat that again?
Okay. When I notch above a bud, why does that bud turn into a shoot?
We've got Robert saying no longer getting the inhibiting hormone from above.
Yeah. It lost its apical dominance. The hormone coming down from the top. The bud below the notch now thinks it's on the top of the tree. Boom. So now, if you notch below the bud, why does it make a flowering spur? This one's tougher.
We got some question marks.
I tried to give enough information earlier on, but I might not have given enough. We'll see. The reason is that the carbohydrates generated by the leaves can't get back down into the root system. So the leaf matter feeds carbohydrates to the bud. The higher the ratio of carbohydrates in a flower bud, the more likely it is to become a flower bud. So notching keeps the carbohydrates from going to the rootstock and favors the fruiting of the bud. So I'll pass out diplomas for all the people that got it right.
We did have John sneak an answer in right as he was saying it, that it accumulates carbohydrates. So he's spot on.
Good. Asian pear, this is my favorite Asian pear host, Sui. If you let it ripen on the tree, fully ripe, it has a smell of brandy, I think. And it's just a delicious fruit. Now you can't summer prune, you have to summer prune lavender once a year. You can't do any other type of pruning, so you're stuck with a heavy pruning after bloom. Whoops, something's wrong there. With the ornamental trees like this maple, you would prune for form, and you would do that as a combination of winter pruning to stimulate side shoots and summer pruning to control any unwanted growth. So yes, summer pruning is a valuable tool, and it can be used lightly. It's not something that has to be done with a whole lot of vigor, but it's enough to shape the tree by dealing with growth while it's in leaf. Some people say, well, if you really want to recover a tree that's out of control, you prune almost every month of the year, so to speak. You prune winter pruning and those every month of the summer to help correct misshapen leaves, those shoots. So here's this is the persimmon collection at Wolfskill near Davis. They have, I think it's 30 varieties of persimmon, 60 varieties of figs, hundreds of varieties of apples. It's a collection by the USDA repository of basically grafting wood. But again, it's a terminal bearing tree. So they never prune these trees except control the height, and they get plenty of fruit. So now we take questions.
Any questions? We can type it in the chat.
The technique is also in my edible landscape book, as well as the lazy ass book. No questions?
Let's see what comes through. What year did you write your edible landscape book?
1986. Still in print.
Nice.
It's a friend of mine said it's a permaculture book before there was permaculture. And it's getting more recognition amongst some of the permaculture people. And a lot of them weren't born when I wrote the book.
Elizabeth had a question. To clarify, how many buds above a graft do you top the tree?
When I get a brand new bare root tree, it depends on what, you have to kind of judge the vigor of the tree, but at least 5 or 6 buds above the graft.
We got a couple other questions coming. What happens to lower fruit or buds when you use a file under a bud to produce fruit?
Say it again, I missed it. What's the first part?
What happens to lower fruit buds or fruit slash buds when you use a file under a bud to produce fruit?
The influence is just not that far away from the wound, so to speak. In other words, if you file below a bud, 5, 6 buds down, it's not getting any influence whatsoever. It may be 1 bud down, but this is a technique I learned in 1980 from Abel Lindquist. And it was just last year the science study came out where they did a research to see if this was true, and they found it worked, but it was best done 2 to 4 weeks before bloom to get the flower buds. So it has a descending order of influence away from where you made the wound, but it's mostly affecting just the bud closest to the wound.
Okay, we've got a bunch of other questions. So Elizabeth's asking, does this apply to tropicals as well?
Good question. I think an awful lot of tropicals are terminal bearing. I can't grow cherimoya, so I'm not certain, but I think they grow fruit on new growth. If they make fruit at the ends of the branches, is a terminal bearing tree, and you just would leave it alone or prune it so it has a sturdy enough limb to hold the weight of the fruit. You don't have to prune to stimulate flower or fruiting. You just have to control usually the width of the tree so the limbs aren't torn off by the weight of the fruit. So citrus, that's a terminal bearing fruit tree, and persimmons. And I assume sapotes and some of the other, you'd have to tell me.
Okay. Do the notches attract harmful insects?
Not that I know of. I haven't seen anything. They didn't have any problems in the study. It was published in the Fruit Grower magazine, a trade journal, about a year ago. And the wound quickly heals itself because you're just scraping slightly below the bark, so to speak, into the zone that's got the pale green area. And then you don't cut into the stalk, the heartwood, you leave that alone. So you make a light skimming action, and then that seals itself up within the season.
Okay. How do you prune a young cherry tree to best encourage fruit?
Oh, cherry trees. Now, cherry trees have flower spurs, but they're I've never seen them. I don't think I've ever seen a Spelier cherry tree because they're so damn hard to control their growth. They tend to want to really make vertical shoots. So what I would do is cut it back really hard so you've got branches near the ground, and immediately spread any side shoots you get to that 45-degree angle. But you can let the vertical shoot grow up for one season. Say it gets to 4 feet in the 1 year's growth, cut it back 2 feet, and get some more side branches below that cut. Let one of the buds grow back up, cut it back in half in the following winter, and you'll get more side shoots so that you get side shoots up into the area that you want to fruit. And then with summer pruning, you take out the leader, the central trunk, so that you would encourage side shoots with winter pruning until you've got enough of them. Then you would take away that vertical shoot and get rid of the apical dominance and control the height of it. But cherries are awful vigorous.
All right. We have a 35-foot avocado tree. How best to make it shorter or top it? It's a question.
Avocados are tough. They have, as far as I know, they have pretty sensitive bark. 1, 2-year-old, 3-year-old bark is really prone to sunburn. And the guideline we use for like plum trees is you have to basically spend at least 1 year to recover 1 year's worth of neglect. So if you have a tree that hasn't been pruned in 5 years, it's going to take at least 5 years to get it back to ideal shape with gradual pruning. You don't want, with any tree, ornamental or edible, you don't want to take out more than 25% of the growth, or else it's too much shock to the tree. So a good tree surgeon, arborist will tell you no more than 20-25% of the wood to be renewed. So to get that height down on the avocado might take you 2 to 5 years, because 1, you're not supposed to take off too many, and 2, you got to be careful to leave enough leaf matter to shade those branches so they don't get sunburned. Like what I did once, I cut back a plum tree too far, and it started to sunburn, so I painted white paint up in the tree on the branches that were exposed to the sun, and then they healed up from there. But be careful, do it gradually.
And definitely the latex paint or some other kind of sun protection could be used if you're pruning it heavier.
Take latex paint, dilute it 50% with water, so it's easy to put on.
Great. All right. If you're game for it, we got a couple more.
Good. I got plenty of time.
All right. So next question is: does the shape of the tree change the lifespan of a fruit tree?
Oh, that's interesting. Good question. I don't think it does, except that the more dwarf you make a tree, well, no, that's true. The more dwarf an apple tree is, I know, the less life it has, less length of bearing. In other words, at what's now the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center, there's some pear trees, and when I lived there in 1980, they were 90 years old, and they're still bearing fruit to this day, somewhere up to 500 pounds of fruit. You wouldn't get that with a dwarf rootstock on a pear tree. You might only get 20 years, you might only get 50 years, but it would definitely not be as hardy to last over 125 years. John, ask John if he agrees with that, because John knows the tree I'm talking about. It's by the kitchen there. We brought a woman that was born on that property there in 1980. She was 90 years old, and that tree was existing when she was born.
Nice.
I know that tree, Robert. And I would agree with you. I think a full-size tree is going to have a longer life for whatever reason. But there are bonsai trees, as we know, that are carefully tended by people in amazing ways that preserve their life. There are bonsai trees that are hundreds of years old. We know that too. So
Right.
there is an
Prune
art
the
to
roots.
maintain
They prune the
trees in a
roots.
small size, and even fruiting bonsai trees. I remember at one show I saw a fig tree that was bonsai'd in a very small dish. It was 4 feet tall, 6 feet wide, and it had 300 fruits on it. So I think what you're saying is absolutely true, and there is amazing skills and arts people have developed to do all kinds of stuff. So in general, yes, I'd certainly agree with you.
Great, great.
Good input. I would love to see photos of that bonsai tree, the fig. Okay, what else we got here? What is the best way to prune apricots? I have 3 fruit on a 5-year-old tree.
Oh, well, I don't know what it's like down there, but up here in the Bay Area, I don't recommend anybody plant an apricot tree. We had some there I lived at the Occidental Arts and Ecology site in 1980, and we got a good crop of apricots every 5 to 7 years. Mostly because it bloomed so early that our rains destroyed the pollination. So it could be a pollination problem due to rains. If it's been that tree that old, it should be fruiting better. It bears on, let's see, it only bears for 4 years, is it, John? Is it 4 years or 2 years on an apricot? Did he disappear?
Gosh, I would agree. We only see apricots about once every 5 years. They kind of alternate bear, and then we'll have a rain that one year they might set fruit, but they it gets rained out or something. So yeah, we go with apriums maybe, or you
Yeah.
got to live more inland than some of us.
Yeah, right over at Winters in Woodland, the Fairlands people will go over there every summer and pick hundreds of pounds of apricots off of Henry Esvenshay's organic apricot orchard, and they've made bumper crops, but that's 2-3 ridges over towards Sacramento.
All right, 2 questions from one person. First, are you saying terminal or tip-bearing apples actually fruit on short new growth of that very same year?
I think I got the question right. Yeah, no, their apples can tip bear. It's not out of the question, but a lot of times it has to do with the angle of the attachment of the limb. But I've seen apples stop the growth of a side shoot because it's fruiting. So you can have both. I mean, everything I say is guidelines. You can find tons of exceptions, like the 300 figs on a little tree is a good example of an exception to the rule.
Okay, and second question was, are horizontal limbs especially useful also for stone fruit?
The horizontal tends to be stronger than less than 45. So in other words, regardless of the tree, ornamental or edible, a wider angle of attachment between 60 and 100 degrees is the strongest attachment. I mean, 90 degrees, 60 and 90 is the strongest attachment. It's just you don't want to go all the way to 90 with a fruiting tree because it favors all those buds sprouting out instead of becoming flower buds.
All right, someone would like to reduce the height of an orange tree. Tips. And they said, I do know you need to use a latex mixture to prevent sunburn.
Yeah, well, it's a similar thing as the avocado. You have to do it gradually over a number of years. And you can get carried away with pruning and it won't be a problem because they fruit on new wood. And so you cannot get too preoccupied with whether or not you're going to stop the bearing of the tree. You would prune it for shape and then let it fruit based on the shape.
Okay. Someone has 2 9-month-old apple trees, a pink lady and its sister, growing against a wall to become espaliered. Are they too young to paint with a half mix of latex paint?
Well, they should have been painted the day they were planted. So because like we have sometimes we put in a tree in early March, and we get a heat spell into March, early April. The bark can get 100, 200 degrees, not 200, but get 100 degrees and get sun scald. So the day I plant any fruit tree, I paint it from below the mulch up into the first primary scaffold. If you haven't done that, go and do it now, although it may be too late. In other words, I've hardly ever gone on a consulting job where I didn't find sunburn on the southwest side of a fruit tree, particularly apples and cherries. The reason is that they're growing all these trees in the commercial fields where the trees are 6, 12 inches apart down the row, and the rows are just 24, 36 inches apart. So the tree has 100% shade until you grab it in the winter, pull it out of the ground, stick it in the middle of nowhere, and now it's got sun for the first time it's ever seen it on the bark. So the bark is just too immature to withstand the sun of a hot day on early spring.
I have a question kind of related to that. Have you heard of IV Organics sun protection? They basically have their own whitewash that they make.
I don't know any reason why you have to do anything other than paint. I mean, there's no need for insecticide in it or
theirs, I think, is actually breathable.
Oh, well, maybe. I've never had a problem with it. It flakes off by the second, third year. It's just a 1 year protection, and by that time the bark has gotten adjusted to the environment and the sunlight and the heat.
Right.
But it doesn't. I've painted all completely covered buds with the paint. They pop right through the paint.
Right. I guess this, for those that are looking to get extra fancy, it comes in green and brown as well. Okay, so someone's asking for suggestions for pruning pomegranate trees that shoot up each year that are attempted to be maintained at about 6 to 8 foot.
Right. Well, pomegranate's another terminal bearing fruit, so the new growth will grow, and then you get your flower, then you get your fruit on New Year's growth, not on second or third year wood. So wherever it shoots that you don't want it, you would prune it back come July or August and take it out partially or completely. It depends upon the vigor of the shoot. In other words, if you've got a shoot that's shot up 6 feet inside of 2 months, you might cut it in half right away and then cut it back some more come the end of August. So you can progressively prune shoots that are out of growth, or not where you want them, or you can do it all at once. But you want, again, not make too many cuts. You want to keep less than 25% of the foliage cut off when you prune.
Okay. Why are the fruits on my fig of Violette de Bordeaux always hard and never ripen? They do color slightly, but never ripen or get soft. It has a southern exposure.
Oh, down there, huh?
Yeah.
Wow. I haven't had a problem with figs not ripening up here, so I don't know what the deal would be. Normally they love the heat, but that is a naturally dwarfing fig, I believe, is that particular fig, but I don't have a clue.
Okay. Is the book you are showing, does it have pruning techniques in it?
Yeah, it has a whole chapter on pruning, and it has goes over the using the toothpick and the clothespins, and it talks about dwarf fruit. One of the values of the book is got like 12 or 18, 15 pages on rootstocks that give you the pluses and minuses of an amazing number of rootstocks for fruit trees. So like Molly Merton 106, you learn if it's susceptible to this disease or that disease. Does it get, what size is it reduced by? Does it like clay? Can it tolerate clay? Does it need sand? On and on and on. So the book, I use my own book for that the most, judging what type of rootstock to get.
Nice. Okay. I will also say that Lazy Ass Gardening also has a chapter in there on pruning and shaping, correct?
Yep. Yep.
Perfect. Are there issues with informal fan or candelabra forms?
Oh, fan. Well, the fan, you're arched out completely from 90 to 100, 90 to 0 degrees. In other words, a handful of those shoots are at that ideal angle of 40 to 60 degrees, but you still got some that are horizontal. So you're half the tree you're dealing with being the wrong angle of attachment to make it easy on pruning. So I frankly don't recommend people do a espalier until they've done a number of years of regular pruning, because it really is one of the hardest things to pull off if you want to try to maintain the form and get fruit. But I only recommend the oblique cordon myself, where the whole tree is planted at that ideal 45-degree angle, and you have less effort to control. Now, when I did the clothespins on those Asian pears, if you stood at the end of the row and looked down the length of the wire, the width of the tree was 3 to 4 feet, because you had to get some width in the process of bending those shoots down. Whereas if I were to do the classic Lorette system of pruning, French Lorette, I might be able to keep the width of that tree down to 12 inches, but I would be pruning every day of the summer to try to control that growth. So with the clothespins, much wider, but easier. So that when people oftentimes do a espalier, they put it right up against the wall, and there's no reason to do that unless you're tying the wires right to the wall. It's much better to keep it away from the wall somewhat and do posts with wiring.
Okay. Any suggestions for very young mango trees?
Oh no, it's not in the Bay Area. I don't have any mango trees. I don't know. I have no idea. I saw them in China, but they weren't young.
Okay. We've got some other folks down south that could probably speak more to that. So we have a semi-dwarf white peach that always gets problems with rust and worms, even treated with sulfur. What could we do? Is it weak because it is a semi-dwarf? We have any other fruit trees. We have other fruit trees that look very healthy.
Oh, okay. Well, peaches, with apple trees, I've never seen an apple tree that needed fertilizer, but I have seen peach trees that need to be fertilized. So that if your peach tree is putting out less than 18 inches of growth, you might try some compost or a very, very light application of manure or blood meal. But in other words, peaches can be greedier on the nitrogen than an apple tree. The next thing is to make sure that peach leaf curl, you have to do a spray program basically after every rain after January, because if you spray with a copper spray in January and it rains, it just washes it off. So that's why I only recommend now the trees have been selected for being resistant to the curl. They're not, some of them are very tasty, some are not so tasty. There are some heirloom varieties of peaches that taste better, but you don't have to worry about spraying.
Okay, I believe a follow-up on that was earthworm castings as a compost amendment.
Yeah, you can do that. It just takes a very small amount, because, well, in the edible landscaping book, there's a chart that tells you how much length of growth do you need to indicate that you got plenty of nitrogen in your soil for a fruit tree. So I don't remember exactly, but let's say apples, it's 12 inches of new growth and you're fine. On plums, if you've got 2 feet of growth, you're totally fine. So that it's very rare for me to find an apple tree that has like only 6 inches of new growth. They're pretty vigorous and adaptable. So the reason I put that chart in the book is that many people I see with organic gardens compost every damn thing in the garden, and the fruit trees usually don't need it. And so you're wasting compost or fertilizer. Also, if you add too much nitrogen, you're stimulating disease and pest problems. So Village Homes is in Davis. It's a sort of like an organic solar suburb, and they have blocks of almond trees, and they planted clover underneath the apple trees with clover underneath the apple tree, and then they used a sprinkler to irrigate them, and they got mildew. Well, you should never get mildew in Davis due to humidity. I think it was a combination of overstimulated by the nitrogen of the clover combined with the spray hitting the leaf. But anyway, check out that list in my book. It was based on one other book and discussions with farm advisors in Sonoma County.
All right, more keep on rolling in.
Well, that's fine.
All right, so we've got, I've trimmed my pomegranate tree every spring before the leaves come out and end up with thousands of branches. There are too many and I don't know which ones will fruit. What can I do?
Yep. What was the first part? They pruned every winter?
Trim my pomegranate tree every spring before the leaves come out and end up with thousands of branches.
Okay, well that's what could be called winter pruning, in the sense that it's while the tree is still deciduous. You don't prune it all. Persimmons pomegranates need no pruning whatsoever to get fruit. You just prune to control the tree and shape the tree so that it's not too wide and the weight of the fruit doesn't tear it apart. But basically, I do no winter pruning on something like a pomegranate, only summer pruning.
I will say that our own pomegranate tree, we had struggled with maintaining like around a 6 foot, 8 foot height. And we were having tons of flowers, but having a lack of fruit set. And this year we did some hand pollination and had a ton more fruit set. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, that's interesting. No, I have, I only have friends that grow pomegranates. I myself don't have pomegranates, but I have a friend that wrote a book on it. But she and my other friend, they're just controlling the tree and they get plenty of fruit. So I'm not sure what's going on with yours.
Okay. All right. My apricot gets thick with small twigs. Should I cut them in the winter or summer?
Oh, you mean like 2 to 4 inches long? Just leave them alone. There's no reason to take them off.
Okay.
If they're not leaves, if they don't have leaves and you want to get rid of them, again, it's only a summer pruning.
All right. Last one for the moment. What about mulberries and cherimoyas, which want to be 30+ feet tall and put on a profusion of 12 to 20 foot straight growth on top annually?
Right. Yeah, well, again, I see that most with people that prune in the winter. Those type of trees, you would ignore winter pruning because it stimulates growth. So that you want to control the growth, you do that June, July, August, in there 1 or 2 or 3 times a summer, and get the shoots early on before they get too tall and leggy.
All right. Well, I think that's exhausted everyone's questions. Oh, actually, John just chimed in with hang the loppers on those trees so you can prune them all summer long.
Yeah.
Leave them in the orchard. Well, Robert, that was an awesome presentation and a really fun Q&A session. Really
Yeah, I liked it.
that. And we're getting some expressions of gratitude on the chat. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us and blessing us with your wisdom. And yeah, I think maybe John might have some closing comments. Thank you again, Robert.
Yeah, actually, Robert, thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation. It opened my eyes. I've got to go back and do a lot of bloody work now. And yeah, I'm sure yeah, Bill Mollison, if he's still around, would have been probably your mentor. He might have been, I don't know, in permaculture, but I know Jeff Lawton, you know, both fellow countrymen from down under. So
Right.
it's interesting that you talk about permaculture and those techniques. And then you told us in that last comment that you know, you can actually over mulch stuff. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. But I have to go back and now get your books and see if I can't recover while my trees are still young.
Right. I also did a book only on pruning for the Smith and Hawken series of books back in the 90s, but you can get it on Amazon for a nickel or something like that.
Okay, and it's obviously still relevant
Yep.
today.
I will say one last comment. There was some questions in the chat window. Robert, you had agreed that it was okay to post this to YouTube to share. Yep. So we will have this available for folks to review. So there's plenty of content to review when you get out there in your summer pruning. Any last things to take away, John?
No, I'd like to thank everybody for their attendance. We had a pretty good roll up. It was over 80, I saw at one stage. So, you know, people are interested, and it's good to see. And, you know, those that came online and aren't members, it'd be great if you became members. So, you know, we love to share the knowledge that we have. We love to bring in new speakers and allow them to share their knowledge with everybody. And once again, thank you very much, Robert, and thanks to everybody. And I'd like you all to stay safe, be safe, follow all of the precautions you can. We're still not through this nightmare at this stage. We probably might get hit with a second wave. So be careful, be safe, and good luck to everybody.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Robert. And everyone, feel free to join us next month. We'll have John Valenzuela on some food forestry. So looking forward to it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Good night.